So tonight's meditation is a question and answer. This is one of my favorites because I love to hear kind of what's on everybody's mind, and I love to talk about something for 5 minutes because then I don't start repeating myself. So I've already gotten a couple of questions from people that I'm going to start with, and then you guys think of your questions. And remember that this is not written in stone anywhere. This is not the gospel. This is just what I believe and what I've come to understand from my experience so far, and stuff that I've stolen from other people. So one of the questions here was an anonymous question that I got in the box, and I hope that this person is listening to this at some point. So the question is, how can we bring in meditative awareness when we can't meditate? And so first of all, I am going to disagree with the premise of the question, which is that there is anybody who can't meditate. Now, maybe they're asking, what if I can't meditate right now, but I want to bring in, that awareness, and that's great. I'm talking about that in a second. But first of all, you should meditate every day, and I don't mean that from a moral standpoint, from like a religious anything. I mean, it's like you understand that meditation is really good for you. You understand that meditation is something that has tons of health benefits mentally and physically. If you're talking about reaching enlightenment, if you're talking about just being a better person, if you're talking about I just need a break from the stress and the insanity of life, you can find at least a couple of minutes every day. And the bare minimum is 5 minutes, but you guys should be able to do 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, no problem. And people say, like, I have too much stuff, and I say, do you sleep? And they say yes. And I say, so just wake up 10 minutes earlier, or go to sleep 10 minutes later, and find a time that works for you. And I would say that if you're not meditating at all, it can be pretty difficult to bring that kind of concentration, mindfulness, awareness into life. But not impossible. I would say that the best way to do it is meditate. Meditate when you can. And then try to use other activities as a bridge from your meditation into everyday life. So this is something I talk about all the time in Tai Chi, because Tai Chi is a really great kind of intermediary step between a sitting meditation where I'm still and focusing my mind on my breath or whatever else it is that I'm focusing my mind on, and then going into movement. So usually we meditate, we're calm, we're peaceful, we have this awareness, and then we stand up and we start moving and we completely lose it. And it's just right back into, I check my phone and oh my God, I gotta reply to this email, or I turn on the TV or the radio, it's blasting. And the stresses and that kind of oppressive sensory input really just starts pushing us. And it is certainly still possible to take the kind of attitude and kind of awareness that we have in meditation and put that into movement. So that's when we do Tai Chi, we're specifically practicing with that in mind. When you're practicing your forms, or when you guys are doing just basic techniques, Kihon or combinations, hitting the mitts, you're trying to get your body to do the right thing, fixing your technique, but you're also getting your mind to be in a moving meditation. This is one of the main goals of our practice, is to practice in a way so that our minds are not distracted, wandering. We're looking for mushin in as many places as possible in our physical practice. And then, if you're able to do that, it then becomes not that much of a leap to have the same kind of awareness and focus when you're doing other physical things. Like, my favorite thing to work on is when I'm doing chores around the house. I'm wiping the counter, like wax on, wax off, or doing the dishes. I'm sweeping the floor. And usually what I like to do is attach a movement to a breath, and you can do this just simply walking. I'm inhaling as I take these few steps, and then I'm exhaling as I take these next steps. I'm inhaling as I'm scrubbing the dish. I'm exhaling as I rinse the dish off. And the breath is not the only way, but it's a really nice way, because when you focus on the breath, it brings you to the moment. When you focus on the breath, it has a tendency to allow you to let go of all of the extraneous, superfluous thoughts, all of that stressful stuff that serves really no purpose in the moment. So that is a great way to practice. Try to take this kind of meditation, this kind of mindfulness into movement, not just in your physical practice, but with everything that you do. And this is one of the reasons why the practice of soji is so important. Soji is when we're cleaning after class, and the advanced class gets to do this. If you guys are in an advanced class, you don't get to do it. But we clean, and you're purifying the space that you're practicing in, making it clean so that it's not disgusting, the dojo doesn't smell like feet. But also, you are immediately extending the same kind of mindfulness into an everyday activity. So we mop the mats every couple of days. We clean the mirrors and the windows. We dust, clean the bathrooms. All that stuff is truly an extension of our practice. And I am positive that if I went into your homes, some of them would be as clean as the dojo, but some of them would not be. And I know this because if you go into my home, it is not as clean as the dojo. I make sure that the dojo is always spotless, and when I'm here, I'm like, every time I see a tiny scrap of paper on the floor, I'm cleaning it up, because it's a mindfulness practice for me. Now, my home is way cleaner than it used to be before meditation, before practice of martial arts. But when I'm here, I'm really, pouring every ounce of attention into that detail and trying to use it as an extension of my physical practice. And then when I choose to, I do the same thing at home. And I enjoy cleaning much more than I used to. I'm just teaching too much at the dojo, so I just don't have a chance to clean as much as I'd like to. So that's the answer to the first question that I've got. Another student asked me, and she's probably listening tonight or trying to. She's asking about kind of my process of asking my own questions. So she says that I encourage you guys to come to me with questions, and I do. And she likes sometimes she may have already come to some kind of conclusion with a question that she hears, but then she hears me answer it, and she gets kind of a new perspective. And she wants to know, who do I go to with my own questions? So she mentioned Sifu Brown. Do I have a running conversation with him? I do. My teacher, I talk to him every couple of weeks at least. And I like to ask him lots of different questions. But it's something, she also mentions meditation. And of course I get my questions answered by meditation, not in the way that a lot of people think of that, where they think of like, I'm just sitting and pondering a question. That's not what I mean when I refer to martial arts, or certainly not that. When I refer to meditation, I mean I'm clearing my mind, but it's a great source to kind of connect to a real direct source of truth, because like she said, kind of, we have a tendency to have these conclusions we've already arrived at, and we have an issue that we're dealing with, or we have a question at hand, and our mind kind of makes this snap judgment, and we think that we know an answer at least. And maybe we'll kind of, think about it and go back and forth about a couple of different things, but at the end of the day, we still have a kind of a tendency to be stuck in where we always have been with this question or things like it. But when you meditate, you get rid of all that stuff, all those things that you've been attached to, all that baggage that you drag into this question or this situation. And you get to this clearing where now, during meditation, I'm not thinking about the question. I'm just working on really clearing my mind. But then maybe I have the question written somewhere, and so I'll pick it up and look at it, and I'll think about it after I've gotten to that clearing. Now, the amazing thing about that is it creates this space where creativity can happen, and I might come up with a completely different answer, a completely different solution, because it doesn't have to be directly connected to the train of thought that I usually have about this thing. So that's great. I get answers to questions from you guys all the time. It's not necessarily like I'm asking you questions, but you're answering questions for me, like that I'm wondering about humanity and, you know, the state of the world and all that stuff. Just the way that I kind of interact with you guys and see where you're at. And it's I think a very important thing for a teacher to be able to do is to keep learning and to learn from your students. If I'm not learning from you, that's a big missed opportunity, because I spend almost every day, most of my day, with you guys. So sometimes you tell me things that I think that's really wise, that's a profound thing. Sometimes just kind of in the way that you are in class. And this is something that I talked about earlier today in Tai Chi. But I think that one of the best things that we can get out of practice is this opportunity to try to be something different. So we have a tendency to get in these ruts, and we have these ways that we always are. And that's great. We have to accept that this is the way that we are, and it's perfect, and there's nothing wrong with the way that we are. And we have to accept that there are lots of other things. There are lots of other ways to be. There are lots of other people who are completely different from us. And this will come as a complete shock for you guys, but before martial arts, I was shy, I was quiet, and not at all, containing any iota of self-confidence or like leadership qualities at all. And just kind of through the process of practicing, especially in teaching, and that started with just helping my partners in class, being a senior student. But it kind of gave me this opportunity that I had never taken before, never even thought of before, of like, I could try today, getting people to listen to me. I could try today, having a little bit more energy, a little bit more force. And the first time I recognized this was when I was doing push hands with one of the senior students back in Michigan, Mr. Newcomb. You remember Mr. Newcomb? And he's a big guy, good at martial arts, and we would be practicing push hands, and he pushed me, and I bow, and I came back in, and we go again, he pushed me, and he stopped, and he looked like this, and he said, "Did you get made fun of a lot when you were a kid?" And I was like, "Yes. Why are you asking me that?" And he said, "Because you just keep letting me push you, and you never try to push back." And that was really one of the first times that I realized that martial arts is a mirror that we can look into and see how we are with ourselves, see how we are with other people. It's kind of like, you can think of it as like a lab, a little place where we go and kind of experiment and tinker and come to these conclusions and recognize things. But it's also an opportunity to experiment and try other things. And you'll recognize that some things, some ways of being work really well in some situations, and some don't work at all in this situation, but it'll work really well in this situation. So through this practice, I would say, I learn a ton about myself, and I get this opportunity to be creative. And this is what I'm talking about in reference to this question about where do my answers come from. I wouldn't say that I make them up, because you'd be able to tell if I made something up. I would just kind of start sweating and get nervous and be like, repeating myself, which I do sometimes. But usually, it's something that I've heard, and maybe I've heard multiple answers to something, and one of the answers really just resonates and makes sense. And sometimes it's just what makes sense because it kind of flows through this emptiness, this space that you get in meditation and practice, where it flows through this process of just trying different things out and seeing how this fits. And so, I've heard it described as like you have a hat and you always wear this hat, and maybe you really love this hat, you feel really comfortable with it, You don't even think about it. You just wake up and you pop it on and you walk outside and that's the hat. But there are other hats. And it's like you could try one day to not wear that hat and to try on this hat. And you might notice that, ooh, it feels a little bit different today. Now this one's a little bit more snug on my head, but that makes me kind of, more aware doing this. And you might notice that people even treat you differently when you're wearing a different hat. Maybe they treat you worse, maybe they treat you better, maybe it's just different. And this kind of process of just trying on something new and see how it fits is very it's very difficult to ignore truth, because usually it just kind of slaps you across the face. It's that obvious. And you'll encounter something for the first time and it's like, oh, I get it. And you guys have felt that in your physical practice when something clicks for the first time, but that same kind of thing happens with the rest of life. So that's my answer for how I come up with my questions and how do I deal with them. But ask me again in 10 years and I'll give you something else. Other question?
Yes, earlier I told you I came to the awareness that humans can sometimes act like dumb machines because they keep playing the same outdated programs over and over again. So what would you say is a good way to rewrite your emotional software, other than maybe purging, because that sometimes can get very messy?
So we recognize that human beings are kind of like machines that just kind of run the same programs, or we're computers, and we do what we've been programmed to do. And really, that can be the way that we experience life most often, is like it's like somebody else or some other force is kind of making us be the way that we are, right? And this calls into question the concept of free will versus fate or determinism or whatever else. And I won't get that deep with it tonight. I'll just go with this idea of, on some level, that is certainly true, right? Because our experiences, and our genetics, and everything that has made us who and what we are today, those are impacting the decisions that we make and the way that we act and the thoughts that we have and the emotions that we have. That all comes from something. And yet, if we refuse to accept the responsibility for the fact that we can reprogram ourselves, which is in your question, then you're in this completely powerless, very kind of lame existence. So you have to realize that I can choose to change my programming. And oftentimes it has to start with kind of similar to what I was talking about with trying on a different hat. It's like, I'm just going to try something different. And a thing that I like to say is just try like the opposite thing. Just do the completely furthest from what you normally do, most outlandish, kind of insane thing, because that will give you just a totally different experience and totally different feeling, and you will probably survive it and then be able to move on. And the next time you approach the same situation, that thing, because it was so different and so big, is probably still going to be fresh in your mind, and then you can go, wait a minute, this is what I normally do, and this is what, my machinery is fighting to just do automatically, but I remember that something else is possible, and so I can try it. And maybe I try this thing and it was crazy and didn't work, but at least I kind of, jumped out of my rut and am now kind of going down a different path that I can create. And you can go too far with that and it can get very dangerous, and kind of, as you're saying, purging. It's like, maybe I normally have this kind of emotional response to somebody who kind of pisses me off, and I kind of just make the face or leave or whatever, and the other way to do it would be just scream and break stuff. Well, I'm not saying do that, but something new, something, shake it up. I think that it's really important to just recognize that that this is all on some level just the same thing as making and breaking habits. I talked about this a couple of months ago because I heard this quote from a monk who I really loved. He said that, it's the quote that I love, not the monk, but he's great too. But the quote was, we have to break the habit of human identification. And so our emotions, the thoughts that we have, all of this have a tendency to be habit. When you think something, it's the same thing as when you do something physically. It's wired in you. It's hardwired. And the more you think or the more you physically act, the easier and easier it becomes to do that, to the point where it becomes almost impossible to do something else. So even with our thought, we want to recognize that and start to work on, doing something else. And it sometimes can work to just, like I said before, kind of get to a clearing and start from nothing, start from scratch. But it can often be more effective to recognize this cycle that we're in and change one thing about it. So you've heard me talk about habits before, where we've got I'm going to mess up the specific phrasing, but it's like the trigger. It's the thing that happens. We've got the action that we take. We've got the reward that we get from that action, and then it kind of recycles back, because the next time we get the same whatever kind of circumstance, the same thing that happens, and then we do the action, then we get the reward. So sometimes we try to just wipe it all out, but what works really well is to keep. You can even keep the same circumstances that bring on that habit, and you can even keep the same reward or choose a reward that's similar to it. You have to give yourself that reward for doing something else. So if this is the emotional state that I go into normally, or this is the train of thought that I go into normally, and I kind of go through it over and over and over again, there's a reason that that's happening. And it's not purely because it's what I've always done. It's because you're getting something out of it. And it might be something that you would be really embarrassed to recognize that you're getting out of it, but it could be, I run this negative tape, this cycle of thought over and over again, and what I get out of it is, I get to feel right about myself, or I get to feel superior, or I get to feel terrible, which I love, because it gives me this kind of like, woe is me, how come the world is so against me? And I'm not saying that this is you, but it's all of us. That's what we get out of it. So I don't think that it's very healthy to keep that exact reward, but something else that kind of that gives you this kind of sense of satisfaction, this sense of feeling comfortable, the sense of kind of feeling like, like you belong with something, instead of this train of thought. You want to make it a different train of thought. But it's difficult. I think meditation plays a really important role because it helps us to recognize this stuff in the first place. So without this kind of introspection, this time that we're spending recognizing what our thoughts are, you'll never get a chance to even attempt this. You'll just keep doing the same cycle of thoughts over and over again. I'm already way past time, but anybody have one more? Nobody? Great. So when we sit to meditate, again, I want you to go into it with the intention tonight of getting to that clearing. So you certainly do have at least a couple of things in your life that are not going the way that you want it to. You certainly do have several of these trains of thought, these cycles of thought that you keep going back to. And we want to first recognize those things and then just accept and let them go. So think of it tonight as like you are showing love to whatever that crap is, whatever that thought cycle, whatever that stuff that's going on in life. You are embracing it, you're showing it love, because the way that we normally do it is we resist and we fight, and then you just basically just keep running up against it like you're running up against this wall. But when you accept it and you show love to that, you show love to your ego and just bring it in, then without that resistance, it has a tendency to just kind of go away, disappear by itself. So that's our goal tonight. Don't resist. Accept, let it go, get to that place of stillness, and make that an easy process. Make that something that feels very comfortable. Sit comfortably.